A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and a very warm welcome to day 2 of Behavioural Exchange, this International Behavioural Insights Conference here in subterranean London. My name's Mark Easton. I work for the BBC, trying to offer journalistic insight into the often baffling behaviour of people and in particular politicians. I'm delighted to be your MC for the day. Allow me to share with you the story of the large blue butterfly. A story of behavioural insight and, I think, a fitting metaphor for this conference. To 19th century British lepidopterists, the large blue was the greatest prize of all. It was very rare, it was very beautiful, and it was very mysterious. No one could find a way to breed them in captivity. Its behaviour seemed baffling. Collectors put the caterpillars, the large blue caterpillars, on its favourite thyme plants, only to watch them fall off, shrivel and die. Bewilderment turned to anguish when in 1979 the large blue was declared extinct in the UK. It took conservationists more than a century to work out what was happening before behavioural insight revealed the large blue's secret. In the wild, scientists discovered, the large blue caterpillar does hurl itself from its bush. But then something remarkable happens. It starts to secrete a sweet fluid that has an odour that attracts red ants. The smell fools them into thinking that the caterpillar is actually a red ant grub, and they haul it into their underground nests. Bear with me with this metaphor, please. There, the caterpillar keeps the ants happy by singing to them and eating vast quantities of their grubs. 10 months later, it hatches out underground, folds its wings, squeezes up through the ant tunnel and out into the sunshine. Who would have thought it? Armed with this insight into the behaviour, see, I'm working hard here. Armed with this insight into the behaviour of the large blue, conservationists have been able to reintroduce it into Britain, and there are now sizable colonies in Devon, Somerset, and indeed the Cotswolds. Quite a success story. The large blue has been nudged back to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference is an opportunity to write similar success stories in the human field. You are here to feast on red ant grubs. Not literally, that would be disgusting. But to nourish and nurture yourselves with the ideas, the research, and the policy practices in the field of behavioural science. Metaphorical red ant grubs, so that when you squeeze upstairs and back into the daylight, I'm working very hard now, back into the daylight, you emerge as beautiful and sought-after butterflies, bringing insight and understanding of human behaviour that can improve social well-being across the planet. Here endeth my large blue metaphor. Now, I know that yesterday was a hugely inspiring day, but I can promise you that day 2 will be as good, if not even better. So much to do, so little time. But before we dive in, I think we do need to pause, we need to reflect on what's happened at BX2015 so far. So I'd like to welcome to the stage the Managing Director of the Behavioural Insights team, Owen Service, and BIT's Principal Advisor, Kate Glazebrook.
Thanks so much, Mark. So I'm Owen Service. I'm one of the bearded members of the Behavioural Insights team that Richard Thaler referred to yesterday. And this is my colleague, Kate. And today, now we're just going to give you a few reflections of the red ant grubs of yesterday before the main event, which is, of course, Hal Varian and Dan Ariely. Yesterday ended with a fantastic drinks reception around the corner in Skylon. Fantastic views. Great wine, great conversations. I like to think that in a year's time, when we hand over the baton to Harvard for BX 2016, there will be a direct line to the conversations and the collaborations that started yesterday evening. That event wouldn't have been possible without the generous support of the Centre for Public Impact, and in particular Adrian Brown, who'll be at the conference today. So I encourage you all to go and seek him out and talk to him and his colleagues. Aside from being a great drinks reception, it probably won't surprise any of you to learn that we ran an experiment last night on your drinking behaviour. Yes, I'm afraid so. Previous studies have shown that people tend to consume more food from large packs of food that are half filled than they do from smaller packs that are filled right to the top. So we thought we'd try something new, different in relation to drinking behaviour rather than food consumption. So it might not have escaped your attention that yesterday the room was divided loosely into two sections. It didn't do much for the acoustics of the room, for the speakers, but it did do a lot for the experimental design. So those of you who are on one side of the room were drinking from larger glasses, from 250 milliliter glasses of wine, and those of you on the other side of the room were drinking from smaller glasses. But importantly, the measures were the same. They were all 125 millilitres. And then researchers from the University of Bristol, including an old research fellow of ours, Olivia Maynard, and her colleague, Marcus Mafano, together with BIT's very own Ariella Crystal, measured how much wine you drank yesterday. Now, obviously, it wasn't the cleanest of experiments. We couldn't control for every factor. We did at one point consider randomly allocating you into different bars, but we didn't think that would be conducive with the collaborative approach that we were attempting to encourage. So we weren't really sure ourselves what would actually happen. So in great BIT tradition, we thought we'd ask you what you think will happen before we reveal the results. So I'm going to ask you whether you'll basically have two options. I'd like you to all raise your hands, and don't be influenced by the raising of hands by those around you. So 2 choices. Who thinks that drinking from a bigger glass, remember the wine measures are the same, encourages you to drink more? Raise your hands if you think that's the case. Okay, interesting. Who thinks that drinking from a smaller glass encourages you to drink more? Okay, so I think the bigger glasses have it. Interestingly, people on the side of the bar that were served wine in smaller glasses drank more, on average, than those of you who were drinking from a bigger glass. But, and it's a big but, because the real world is noisy, we can't conclude from last night alone that this is a statistically meaningful difference. The good news is, though, that it gives us a lot of useful information about how we can run real-world experiments of this kind. And the conclusion that I've reached is that we need to repeat this experiment again and again. So if you'd like to help me with that endeavour, then come and find me at 6 o'clock this evening, and we'll tour the bars of London. So I'm now going to hand over to Kate, who's been interviewing all of you over the past 24 hours.
Great, thank you, Owen. As Owen said, I've been interviewing you. You might recognise me as the person you've been trying to avoid, because together with my colleague Antonio and some of our other colleagues from BIT, we've been out and about with a camera crew and bright lights in your eyes to get a temperature check on how you're experiencing the event so far. So we've been asking you a number of questions, what you found interesting, what you're excited to see. Danny Kahneman came up a lot there. We also asked a few of you where you thought the frontier for the behavioural science field should go next. And a couple of lucky ones of you got questions like, if you were an unscrupulous profiteer, which behavioural bias would you be picking on most? Some of the themes that came out of yesterday were collaboration, as Owen referred to. And I think a lot of people sort of drew out of their experience that this isn't a field that will progress through one approach alone or through one discipline. So it's really exciting to see the breadth of experience that we've got in the room here. Another theme that came out is things are not always what you expected. And I noticed that our own David Halpern got his experimental analysis wrong on whether or not the cup size was going to go which direction. So things are not what you expect, and it's always worth testing is another thing that seemed to come out of yesterday's experiences. On frontiers, we heard a lot about, we've heard great things happen with tax letters, but what are we going to do about the really big issues of world conflict and intergroup conflict and social trust? So a lot of people seem keen for us to kind of tackle those much more thorny issues. And the final thing that seemed to come out of it was also the idea that people here seem to want to take what you're learning and tomorrow be able to apply it to what it is that you're doing in your own jobs. So it's really exciting. I think for most of us who work on Behavioural Insights team, one of the great success factors for us is that you can do just that, and that by all being in this one room, we're speeding up the process of disseminating great ideas, great approaches, and that you can connect directly with people who are doing cool things in other parts of the world that are of interest to you. But don't believe what I tell you. We do have a short little video that gives a quick synopsis of some of the views of people from yesterday's interviews.
One of the biggest lessons of the first session certainly was that Behavioural Insights is about changing the environments in which we work, live and learn, and not people's minds. In order to do that, we have to make it easy for people to actually do the kinds of things that they think is best for them to do.
I was so interested in Michael Norton's comments about engineering social interactions in groups, because there is this question about the ethics of the whole approach. And the idea of engineering social interactions raises all sorts of ethical questions.
I was really interested to hear what Eldar Shafir was saying in the session that we've just had, which was around how poverty kind of can influence your whole mindset and about how you go about your day-to-day life.
One particular one, very obvious really, was from Idris from Harvard about gender. The fact that if you have more girls, if you have girls in a class, it will automatically improve the performance of the rest of the class.
So one thing I really get from this session that's really interesting is the network nudges that Mike Norton talked about. I can't really catch up with all the new discoveries in the nudge research, so it's great to have here like the new stuff that really works. And so the network nudges, I can practically use it like tomorrow when I go back to the office, I can actually use it with some clients.
For me, the most interesting piece of information was that interviews are essentially useless in predicting future performance of employees.
I think the most interesting thing I've learned today is that default opt-in to organ donation doesn't always work because people might not have told their families what they want, and that means that then they can change that person's mind about what they've said.
The thing I found most interesting today was a new appreciation of the complexity of the decisions and the decision-making processes, and perhaps the lack of support mechanisms for doctors when dealing with complex issues that face them in treating patients.
One of my favourite talks was that by Johannes Eichstätt, and he was talking about how we can use language from platforms such as Facebook to not only predict people's personality and whether they're going to fall into depression, but also looking at predicting offline behaviours as well.
The questions from the floor were really good. I mean, that really kind of probing questions about future savings, institutional reform, as well as, what are the right behavioural nudges in different societies and different circumstances. So, really, really good session.
Great. One of the things that Kay said before the video was around the take-homes that we can all take away from this conference, and we were just talking about what some of those might be for BIT that we'd share with you now. From the opening session, the one on the world's greatest challenges, somebody mentioned it already in the VoxPots, and it was a comment that Iris made in relation to recruitment practices. I think we're now going to change the way that BIT does its own recruitment by abandoning panel interviews from now on. We then had that brilliant session from Stephen Pinker at BIT from now on. I think before we send out any documents or go live with any new trials based on some form of communication, we're going to be getting non-experts to read the materials before they go out. We also learned a lot from Bob Cialdini, who, by the way, has read an impressive number of BIT reports, which was a personal highlight for me. And so in keeping with Cialdini's suggestion that you need to go first with reciprocity, you'll find on your chairs some BIT brainstorming cards. We were going to give them to you at the end of the day, but after hearing from Bob, we thought we'd bring that forward. Our only ask of you is that you go away and you use those cards to help spread understanding of behavioural insights and the experimental approach. And then there was that fantastic interview between Richard Thaler and Daniel Kahneman, Two bits of advice that we thought were particularly interesting from that was, aside from the pain that Kahneman went through when writing Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman said, don't study anything that is not fun and that is not interesting for you. And I think that's a lesson that we can all take away into all of the work that we're now going to be doing after the conference. And Richard Thaler's advice on academics starting out, he said, be less about the literature and more about life. And then we had that range of 6 parallel sessions, and I think the one thing I'd say on that is that we're going to put all of that up online. Obviously, nobody was able to go to all of them, but you'll be able to interact with all of them online from next week. And if you're going to go and watch any one of them, I would recommend that you go and watch the session called You Are the Doctor. And this was an interactive video, which I'm describing as a kind of cross between Dungeons and Dragons and ER, in which the audience had the experience of taking decisions as if they themselves, you, were the doctor. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for the patient. But it did teach us some important lessons about the complexities of decision-making in real-world environments, and that is what BX is all about.